Olá a todos, sejam bem-vindos ao evento Ubiratan D'Ambrosio, pessoa, contribuições e memórias. Eu sou Carlos Matias, hoje estou aqui acompanhado pelo professor Milton Rosa e pelo professor Daniel Clarchiori. Nós estamos recebendo aqui 3 colegas de diversas partes do mundo, a professora Kay Owens, o professor Tony Trinick e a professora Linda Furuto. Hoje será uma apresentação que será feita em inglês durante todo o evento, então eu peço a compreensão de todos. Posteriormente, esse vídeo nós iremos inserir legendas mais à frente um pouco, após a conclusão do evento. Então, hoje a nossa fala será toda em inglês. Eu vou passar aqui a palavra. Sejam todos muito bem-vindos. Nós temos colegas aqui presentes de todo o Brasil. O chat está lotado de gente. Então é muito bom saber que estamos espalhados pelo mundo todo, todos com muito carinho pelo nosso querido Ubi. Então, Daniel, Linda, Kay e Tony, bom evento, muito obrigado.
Charles.
Charles.
Charles. Yeah. Okay, Carlos. Thank you very much for your introduction. And I would like to thank Linda. In fact, in Hawaii, it's about 3 in the morning, right, Linda? And I would like to thank Tony. In New Zealand, it's about 1 in the morning. And Kay, she's in Australia, and it's about 11 in the evening.
Thank you so much.
So thanks so much for being here with us and pay this tribute to Ubiratan D'Ambrosio on the other side of this planet.
Yes.
Right. So Daniel is going to make a little introduction for you. So just wait a second, please. And Daniel is going to introduce properly yourselves to the audience. First, Kay, Daniel.
Okay. It's my pleasure to introduce Kay Owens, who is an adjunct associate professor in the Faculty of Arts and Education at Charles Sturt University in Australia. Kay is a secondary health education and mathematics teacher in Sydney and then lived in Papua New Guinea for 15 years teaching mathematics, statistics, and computing at Papua New Guinea University of Technology and Health Education and education at the Balob Teachers College. I hope I got that right. While lecturing at Western Sydney and Charles Sturt Universities, Australia, she returned to work on ethnomathematics with PNG colleagues about 15 times and had several projects with her regional First Nations Wiradjuri group in Central West NSW. Okay, her relationships with First Nations people and their issues began during her own university days.
Okay, now
welcome, Kay.
Yeah, now we're going to introduce Linda.
You or me?
You.
It's very exciting to introduce my dear friend Linda Furuto from Aloha, Oahu, and is a professor of mathematics education at the University of Hawaii in Manoa. Prior to joining the University of Hawaii, Dr. Furuto was an associate professor of mathematics and head of mathematics and science at the University of Hawaii, West Oahu. Dr. Furuto completed her PhD at UCLA, master's degree in Harvard University, and bachelor's degree at Brigham Young University. Over the years, Dr. Furuto has been a visiting scholar of math at the University of Tokyo, worked in the Boston Public Schools as a research practitioner at Harvard University's Inventing the Future project, taught secondary mathematics and music at the Fiji Technical College, conducted research at the U.S. Department of State in Washington, D.C., and is an education specialist and apprentice navigator with the Polynesian Voyaging Society and traditional voyaging canoe, Hokuluea. And for more information, you can consult her wonderful, beautiful site.
And the next one is going to be Tony Trinick. Then he's going to present Tony as well.
I'm really pleased to introduce to you all Associate Professor Tony Trinick, who is an Indigenous mathematics educator in Aotearoa, New Zealand. He has worked in collaboration with the community to create the specialized mathematics language to enable the teaching of mathematics in the Maori language. He has led a number of Indigenous-centric curriculum development projects and research projects to revitalize the Indigenous language and knowledge drawing on social justice theories and the work of D'Ambrosio and other researchers in ethnomathematics. Tony has collaborated with mathematics education researchers in Colombia, Peru, Chile, and Norway. And I'm so glad all three of you are here with us. Thank you again so very, very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. So the presentations will begin. The first one is going to be Kay, the second one is going to be Linda, and the third one is going to be Tony. Okay, and please, the audience will ask you to place comments and also questions on the chat. So after the presentations, we can chat a little bit about what they're doing in their own places on the Pacific side of this planet. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I think we can start. Thank you very much.
Obrigada.
Okay.
Bom dia. And I would say ogeta in Papua New Guinea, but that's not what I would say in Portuguese. This is really a tribute to D'Ambrosio Ubi and his contribution to Australia and Papua New Guinea. And I call it equity that he's emphasized, and social justice and ethics. And I hope that I will be able to explain that through this short talk. Thanks, Carlos. Ubi came and gave a lecture in Australia at ICME in 1984. And one of the mathematicians in Australia said he was saying these strange things that we would not understand very much. And it revolutionized people because people had thought mathematics was just the one kind of mathematics around the world. And other people like Phil Clarkson, who came down from Papua New Guinea and heard him, and there was quite a group of Australians and New Zealanders and others working in Papua New Guinea at the time who were particularly keen to come to that ICME talk. And they said it made sense to them because they'd been working in Papua New Guinea. And but it still gave them credibility for continuing to consider the issues of culture and mathematics and language and mathematics. So he did influence the people there. Thank you. And over the last 20 years in our 4 yearly reviews of mathematics education research in Australasia, we have a 4 yearly review, and for the last 20 years there has been a chapter basically on equity and ethics and culture, and also there's often one on language, and it's Australians and New Zealanders. We're all in one Australasian group, and the Pacific and Asian nations as well that are part of this research group. And many of our top researchers are involved in considering mathematics education and society, and many belong and often go to that particular conference. One of the reviews talked about, from Atway, Bill Atway, the idea of social turn. Much of our maths education up till then had been around the psychology and mathematics education. And there's been quite an emphasis on social justice, mostly because of the importance of Indigenous rights. And I think what Ubi has said connects very closely with our intention to consider the rights of Indigenous Australians, our First Nations, and also our multicultural and multilingual classrooms. It was the first waves of immigrants that came in the 1970s, 80s, even perhaps before that, from parts of Europe around the Middle East and so on, had to assimilate, just as everybody had, or the whiteskins at least, had expected the indigenous people to. But at that stage, people began to realize we had to have a change of political approach, and multiculturalism and multilingual classrooms were anticipated. But even so, I would go into a classroom when I returned from Papua New Guinea in the 1990s, and in some places they were still not multilingual, allowing children to talk in their own language in the classroom. They do now, and I think people have really tried to make those links to mathematics education. Gail Fitzsimons told me that she spoke with Ubi, and she said, what about adults and their culture? Does that fit in with ethnomathematics? And in a sense, he gave her courage to talk about adults and maths education as well. Gila later and quite a number of other researchers have particularly looked at gender issues and been keen to see that as part of the social and the areas regarding equity for girls and boys in that. And I think another thing that's influenced Australia has been the LGBTIQ activism, and that too has been an influence. Thanks. So I want to talk about our First Nations, and they have been very active in encouraging a change in education in Australia. And it links with what Ubi has done, and I think it's a tribute to Ubi to recognise that his emphasis on equity and recognition of ethnomathematics means that the work of our First Nations is also respected. So one of our researchers, Yanka Porter, has developed a model called 8 Ways, which is used extensively and really changed people's approaches for teaching mathematics education in Australia. Things such as using stories, using a learning trajectory, respecting different approaches, deconstructing and reconstructing are some of the ways that Yanka Porter has in his 8 Ways. There's also a large emphasis from the stronger, smarter Indigenous approach to education, and many teachers have learnt from our First Nations group about their approach to learning and tried to overcome the deficit model that tends to be otherwise seen, and breaking down that approach, which is a deficit model, and so saying our ways of thinking are stronger and smarter, which is great. There has been collaboration of the mathematics educators, I think, with our First Nations through the Queensland University of Technology in particular, with Stronger Smarter, and the Australian Association of Maths Teachers. There have been joint projects to emphasise the importance of Indigenous ways of learning, and mathematics is included in that. And then there is another network, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Mathematics Network, with mathematicians particularly Chris Matthews, and it's also a strong group for recognising First Nations. And I have quoted there a recent statement. For us in Australia, we find it hard with the politics to have to cope, if you like, with not having a recognition of our Indigenous people in our constitution or having a treaty. And this is just one statement. We seek constitutional reforms to empower our people and take a rightful place in our own country. When we have power over our destiny, our children will flourish. They will walk in two worlds and their culture will be a gift to their country. We call for the establishment of a First Nations voice enshrined in the Constitution. So that statement is one that's driving forward a recognition of First Nations in Australia, and including in education and maths education. Thank you. I'm now going to look at research in Papua New Guinea, even though I was asked for Australia, because Australia administered Papua New Guinea up until independence in 1975. And so our colonialism certainly influenced Papua New Guinea, and it's now in a neo-colonial situation. And I think the work of D'Ambrosio and others in ethnomathematics is to be acknowledged there. Alan Bishop visited for about 6 months, but as you know, he was highly influenced by his time in Papua New Guinea with his mathematics enculturation, but even more so with Debro and Presmeg in his next book on ethnomathematics, if you like. Jeffrey Sachs has visited a few times, and I think his work has an important message to say. And Richard Zepp really encouraged the University of Goroka with their mathematics, culture and language subject. And that's where most of the research in ethnomathematics has been carried out by student teachers. Now, D'Ambrosio influenced Bill Atway, and Bill Atway influenced Rex Matang, and Rex did his first study, his master's study with Bill. And as you know, Rex was a driving force in ethnomathematics in Papua New Guinea. Alan supervised Glenn Lean. Glenn lived at the university. He was my colleague at the University of Technology in mathematics, and he looked at counting systems in the languages of Papua New Guinea and Oceania over a 22-year period. So it was an incredible work that he did and showed the longevity of the mathematics of Papua New Guinea. I think I've continued that, looking at other areas of mathematics, and I'm just writing a book with Patricia Paridi, Charlie Mookie, Phil Clarkson, and my husband, with looking at Papua New Guinea's mathematics education. So that's just been finished and at the publishers, so it's coming along. And I think it's going to be important there in terms of ethnomathematics. I'll talk more about that in a moment. So language issues were also important. So that's Rex at the opening of the Glenn Lean Ethnomathematics Centre at the University of Goroka. And it has been a place, a repository for research papers, for Glenn's collected papers on mathematics in very early contact in Papua New Guinea, and also what he had collected. His thesis is there in a hard copy. There have been the research projects from the students who have done mathematics, language and culture studies, and there would be around 300 of those. There are through PREL from Hawaii, there was some funding to digitize these papers, and we did have a website for a while, but it's not been reinstated, and I'm not sure what happened to a lot of that, but for a while there, we had that out to the world with the counting systems as well. The centre is also the best place to go if any visiting scholars want to do research within Papua New Guinea, or just to visit and talk about maths education, and matter of asking them if you can visit. That's the best way to go if you want to go to Papua New Guinea and do research. Thank you. This is Rex. If you want to do research in Papua New Guinea, you've got to get around on very rough roads. So the first thing you have to do is get yourself a car. So that he's very proud about his car that his relatives helped him to buy for his research. And he looked at whether the children could learn their mathematical concepts early in their home language. Was it better than learning in English? And overall, he did show that. Unfortunately, he died before he could complete his PhD, but I have taken some of his work and written it up. So people did actually have that written as a paper. Thank you. And you go to the school. So there's a typical village school built by the villagers. Quite often the teachers didn't even get paid by the government because they needed to be registered after inspection, and that's not very easy to do because many of these schools you can only walk into, and if you do have a car it's pretty rough. But at the moment, the inspectors might not have a vehicle to get to the school, so quite tricky. Thank you. When we arrive at the school, you have to talk with the community about your research, and that's an important part. I'll talk about that in a moment as to what happened with the reform. This is Rex, set himself up. You take your own table, you take your camera, you take your shade, because it's quite hot there, and all your equipment. And he was interested in cognitive development and used a schedule. He adapted it for Papua New Guinea children from an Australian approach with Bob Wright, and he's looking to see if the children could learn their early concepts better. Thank you. This is a typical classroom. You can see the cardboard around the walls. That's one way of keeping yourself a bit warm if you're up in the mountain area. Cardboard on the floor is a bit cleaner than the ground to sit on. Most of the children will have to sit, and looks like mostly the girls are sitting on the floor in this case. Next. There's another class with a new classroom being built to try and cater for the many children going to school. So this was the way Papua New Guinea tried to provide education to all the children. It's still not universal education. The growth rate has outstripped the possibility at the moment for universal education. They just can't train the teachers. Thank you. So there was a reform that started around 1990 and went through to about 204 before all of the syllabuses were written. And the idea was to have elementary schools in the vernacular, the children's home language, and then bridge to English. at least the children were counting. They were doing at least their counting to 10 or 20 maybe. They were intended to have bi and multilingual English in primary school. We know that the conceptual understanding is better if children begin school in their home language. The aim was to provide these village children with schooling. However, there was a lack of training of these teachers, and they were not taught how to teach multilingually. They weren't taught about how to teach reading in their own language. Some of the languages needed an orthography. They needed to have it written down because they were only oral languages. And it's only where there have been linguists working or Bible translators working that they had mostly their written language. So that was really uphill, and no money had been put into it. Australia was obviously still having a bit of an influence and a bit too ignorant about the real situation on the ground. So then they had a structure change with 3 years of elementary, 6 years in primary school, 4 years in high school. And it was the first time that often year 11 and 12 were in all the high schools. Before that, there were only 4 national high schools teaching years 11 and 12. So not a great deal of education there. Thank you. However, there were issues. It was underfunded, totally. They also had Australians to help out with preparing the curriculum. And at the time, outcomes-based education was the curriculum. So there was a very thin syllabus and a very thin, there were teachers' guides, but they didn't get to the schools. And the elementary teachers, as I said, lacked teacher education. There was some research, but, it was perhaps limited. And as I said, when we went to the village with Rex, the first thing we had to do was to talk about, but I don't think the children are learning English and as well as I did when I went to school in English, not realizing that the best students had gone to school before that. And there was such a drop-off because of examinations to go on from one section of schooling to the next, as well as the difficulty of finding the fees for village children to go to school. And so it was hard to say that. And Rex was saying, well, that's what my research is about. It's to show whether children can learn their early mathematics better in their home language. And they learned at least as well, if not better, and they were being tested in not necessarily in their home language. So if we could join, thanks. So there was a political decision to throw out what they called the OBE, the outcomes-based education. Go back to what we had before, they wanted to say. Let's try and have English as a language of instruction, despite what they knew about the research. So there was some confusion in introducing this reform. I would hear people say, we're going to have it standard across the whole country. What we're going to do, we're going to teach in English, even though there are 850 different languages. And that then they wanted Japanese aid, because by now they were looking north to Asia, not to Australia. They didn't want to have anything to do with the colonialists, and to set up their new curriculum. So that's been unfortunate in some respects. There's also confusion. They've gone back to 1 year elementary and 6 years in primary and 4 to 6 years in high school. Yeah, 4 years. Yeah. So it's 6 years in high school. So that's a change, and now all the schools are all over the place. But there's still a bit of a fight to have this. Okay, next. So we find that there is a bit of neo-colonialism from, and I talk about the third culture Indigenous kids. So those who actually went to perhaps international schools, who went overseas for schooling, who think, you know, Western mathematics is still best. And everything was underfunded. But my hearing lately is that they're trying to marry the two syllabuses, the reform with vernacular being recognised and ethnomathematics being recognised, with going to a standards-based education. Next. There have been electives written in ethnomathematics for teachers' colleges. I don't think they're often actually studied. We do need more research there. However, I did hear just the other day that the self-instruction unit that some of you would have heard about, our project with elementary teachers, with Bargi Bino and Chris Edmonds-Wathen, may have been taken up by the elementary teacher training, which is great to hear. So we have had a bit of an influence. Thanks. Next. Yeah. So in that unit, we've talked about how young children learn maths, how they think, how to involve social and cultural maths in their study, how to think about language, how to have good maths teaching with groups, concrete materials, local experiences, and using the home language and using inquiry. Next. They're just some references. Thank you. Obrigada.
Thank you so much, Kay. That was wonderful. And we're sorry to have to cut you off.
No, I was finished.
Okay, good. It's a wonderful presentation, Kay, to let us know what's happening in Papua New Guinea and Australia in a certain way. Okay, now we're going to go for Linda's presentation. We're glad to have you here as well.
In the middle of the night, in the middle of the ocean.
Exactly.
Welcome.
Aloha mai kako. My name is Linda Furuto, and as was kindly mentioned in that very gracious introduction by two beloved friends, Daniel and Milton, I'm a professor of mathematics education and the director of the Ethnomathematics Graduate Certificate and the Master's Degree in Curriculum Studies Math Education at the University of Hawai'i at Manoa. I begin with the acknowledgement that the University of Hawaii is a model Indigenous serving institution, of which I'm part of, and the land on which I teach and learn was yielded by Her Majesty Queen Liliuokalani under duress to the United States. I recognize that generations of knowledge systems shaped Hawaii in a way that allows us to be here today. For this, I am truly, truly grateful. I thank you for joining us, and in addition to each of you, I express my sincerest appreciation to our families, communities, and kupuna, our ancestors who made it possible for us to gather like this today, including the beloved Ubiratan D'Ambrosio, who taught us so many important lessons, such as to treasure familial relationships with people, the land, and our environment. Today, I'll share some reflections on the influence of Ubiratan D'Ambrosio in the development of ethnomathematics in diverse contexts, with a focus on Hawaii. So with humble heart, I thank you again for allowing me to share this space with you. Next, please. I open with a story about where we're from that has guided our work and extend an invitation to continue to voyage with us. The story of Hokulea and the culture that created her is one that was almost lost and was close to extinction. Hokulea, Star of Gladness, is a Hawaiian voyaging canoe renowned for the role it has played in rekindling the Pacific Island traditions of wayfinding and celestial navigation by the sun, the moon, the stars, tides, winds, among others. Since the mid-1970s, Hokulea has sailed over 160,000 nautical miles, including the recent Malamaho'nua worldwide voyage, which means to care for our island Earth. As we work to protect cultural and environmental resources for our children's futures, our teachers, such as Ubiratan D'Ambrosio, teach us to venture beyond the horizon to connect and learn with others through education. Next, please. I'm humbly grateful for the opportunity I've had to serve as apprentice navigator and education specialist. Prior to departure from Hawaii to Tahiti, Master Navigator Nainoa Thompson and I went walking, and we watched the stars rising in the heavens. He gave me profound wisdom, and he said, "Linda, you need to have a vision. If you don't, someone will take it away from you, or they'll give you theirs." On that note, at the 1984 International Congress on Mathematical Education, UB5, UBI envisioned the creation of a global society where, quote-unquote, mathematics for all reached an unprecedented dimension as a social endeavor by questioning the equilibrium of mathematics education. I thank UBI for his profound words that resonate now more than ever. 3.5 decades later, I share reflections on re-examining the socio-cultural role of mathematics education in the schooling process, specifically through an ongoing process of wayfinding on land and on sea at this pivotal period in history. Furthermore, the U.S. National Science and Technology Council's strategy for STEM education is an urgent call to action for, quote, lifelong access to high-quality STEM education, especially those historically underserved and underrepresented in STEM, unquote. In other words, a North Star to collectively chart a course forward. The current era emphasizes the dreams, possibilities, and necessity of public education and the role of mathematics in influencing the equilibrium of achievement. Our voyage from grant-funded professional development in ethnomathematics to an institutionalized program at the University of Hawaii at Manoa is inspired by our teachers and our mentors. Next, please. The following is a working definition guided by those who have shaped our path, including our beloved Ubi, Milton, Rosa, Daniel Clark Ore, Sandy Dawson, Rest in Love, Rochelle Gutierrez, Sharon Nelson Barber, and Arthur Powell, to name a few. Ethno being a grouper community, Mathema, understanding and explaining facts and phenomena, teaching and sharing, and TICS, manners, modes, abilities, arts, and techniques. Next, please. Ethnomathematics is real-world problem solving that has empowered our students to be locally minded global citizens through a sense of purpose and a sense of place. With the guidance of the aforementioned mentors and teachers, our students have designed and implemented culturally sustaining instruction that affirms students' identities as authors of mathematics. And ethnomathematics challenges students to solve rigorous and worthwhile mathematical tasks that are relevant, meaningful, and contextualized. And we strive to support collaborative classroom communities and leverage mathematics as a sense-making tool for personal, social, and political change through equity and access. All of the photos in the presentation are of our students and staff engaged in ethnomathematics activities. In this photo, we're doing service learning and clearing invasive plants from a 400-year-old fish pond while talking about matrices and systems of linear equations. Next, please. There are several policies that frame our work. The Hawaii P20 Council, which is comprised of educational stakeholders throughout Hawaii and U.S. affiliated Pacific Island, many of whom are partners of our ethnomathematics program, adopted a definition of college, career, and community readiness that has 4 main pillars, including an ongoing process of wayfinding to engage in local, national, and global contexts. Next, please. Specifically, students are able to identify their kuleana and work hard to fulfill these responsibilities to their families, aina, the land, community, and future and past generations, unquote. Next, please. In light of this definition, the Promise to Children of the Worldwide Voyage was authored by these educational stakeholders, stating, "We believe that the betterment of humanity is inherently possible, and we believe our schools, from early childhood education through advanced graduate studies, are a powerful force for good. This is the voyage of our lifetimes. The University of Hawaii's 10 campuses have active programs and projects to achieve this goal, such as ethnomathematics and STEM learning," unquote. This is a photo of Hawaii's educational leaders steering Hokulea, including the University of Hawaii System President, the Hawaii State Department of Education former superintendent and her mother, the Hawaii Board of Education member Cheryl Kauhane Lupenui, and the former dean of the UH Manoa College of Education, which prepares 65% of Hawaii's teachers. Next, please. This is a photo of one of our cohorts. Ubi taught us, and we strive to live by the Olelo No'eau, the Hawaiian proverb, "A'ohe pau ka ike I ka hala ho'okahi." All knowledge is not taught in the same school, or one can learn from many sources. In working with and learning from the populations we are endeavoring to serve, we engage in co-construction of enduring transformational change toward the world that Ubi envisioned. I also like to send a special shout out to a couple of the ethnomathematics, Hawaii Ohana and Canadian Ohana, who are here today, Margaret Miura from Hawaii and Nikki Lynham from Canada. They're former participants in this program. Next, please. For the first 10 years, from 2008 through 2018, the Ethnomathematics and STEM Institute was funded by grants such as the National Science Foundation and the U.S. Department of Education. The Ethnomathematics and STEM Institute brought together research institutions, cultural practitioners, and community-based organizations to support professional development for STEM educators. As a side note, for the first 5 years when I was an associate professor of mathematics at UH West Oahu campus, we focused on undergraduate STEM majors. Here are some photos starting in the upper left-hand corner of participants connecting math and music through computer technology. Upper right, studying wave properties and wind dynamics from Makapu'u Lighthouse. Bottom left, utilizing our bodies as tools in geometry and measurement. And bottom right, exploring sustainability and tropical marine biology by clearing invasive mangroves through service learning at Waikaloloko Fish Pond. Next, please. Our main goals and objectives are to identify effective, promising practices that improve student success rate, especially for underrepresented populations in STEM. Our goals are, first, to increase content and pedagogical knowledge in culturally sustaining STEM, aligned with federal and state standards, benchmarks, and general learner outcomes. Second, to prepare teacher leaders to provide instruction and professional development in ethnomathematics and STEM in their schools and communities. And third, strengthening sustainable campus community networks to support college, career, and community readiness. Next, please. With great pleasure, we share the news that the past decade of research and development in conjunction with our local and global partners led to institutionalizing the world's first academic program in ethnomathematics at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. None of this would have been possible without UBI. It first began in summer 2018, and the Ethnomathematics Graduate Certificate is an 11-month, 15-credit hybrid program that's run annually with participants from around the world. From his home in Brazil on multiple occasions, we were so grateful when Ubi joined us virtually and shared wisdom such as mathematics is the dorsal spine of modern civilization, leading humanity through mathematics education to an era of peace and dignity for all, unquote. Ubi encouraged us every step along the way with his nurturing guidance, and I can still hear his words in my head. I hope to follow your further creativity to improve mathematics education. The UH Ethnomathematics program is built upon the work of so many others who have been engaged in this work for a very long time. Again, it would not be possible without Ubi. This program, with Ubi's guidance, he helped us just think through various aspects and facets which are important for our teachers, and our participants. And the program is run primarily online. And so because of that, the tuition is nearly the same for in-state and out-of-state or international residents. Coursework includes research methodology, curriculum design and development, issues in diversity and equity, etc. Students who would like to pursue a master's degree in curriculum studies, math education, may complete both the master's degree and the Ethnomathematics graduate certificate concurrently. The combined program is 17 months, 13 credits of hybrid courses, and students have one additional semester after the graduate certificate to complete a master's thesis or project. Next, please. Our mission is to encourage stewardship of our world and cultivate social justice by empowering educators to transform their lives and the lives of their students through education, research, and networking. Our vision is every child will know who they are, where they come from, and where they're going. Next, please. Our conceptual framework is comprised of pillars and kuleana, responsibilities or values. We hope these are instilled in our teacher participants and us, and ultimately back to the P20, early childhood through graduate studies classrooms and students there. We envision our conceptual framework as a hale, or a house, where the definition of ethnomathematics is held up by pillars of integrated content, teaching practice, environment, culture, community, legacy, and values. The kuleana which live within the house are lokomai ka'i, to share, imi'ike, to seek knowledge, na'aopono, to be just, malama, to care for, olakino mai ka'i, to live healthily, aloha, to show kindness and compassion, mahalo, to show gratitude and respect, and laulima, to work together. The hale is part of a larger kauhale, or a group of homes, wherein our network continues to grow with partners and educational stakeholders. These pillars and kuleana frame the ways which ethnomathematics lessons are developed and used in the program, as well as in the classroom by our teachers. Next, please. As examples of classroom connections, one instructor in our program used ethnomathematics to develop STEM camps for 7th graders, which integrate mathematics and scientific knowledge using the Hawaiian star compass and traditional wayfinding practices to teach children about geometry and to learn the mathematics behind provisioning supplies for a voyage. Additional units include local biodiversity, composting, and the mathematical and scientific principles behind the making of traditional fermented foods. In her courses, students visited Mauna Loa Observatory to learn how CO2 concentration data is collected, predict future CO2 scenarios, and better understand the global effects of climate change. They also use Fibonacci numbers to explore pollination and photosynthesis, employ contact angles to investigate the hydrophobicity and self-cleaning properties of taro or kalo, a culturally important plant and food source to Hawaiian people, and to use quadrats to sample plastic pollution on local beaches while completing beach cleanups in order to help give back to our community and our environment. Next, please. On our program website, we invite you to please check out curriculum created and implemented by participants. The curriculum library is searchable by keyword, learner level, Common Core State Standards, Next Generation Science Standards, as well as other standards and benchmarks. Next, please. When the Institute began at UH West Oahu, enrollment increased in mathematics courses to over 1,400%. In addition, according to the University of Hawaii Institutional Research Office, the overall passing rate in mathematics courses almost doubled the average passing rate for the UH system. In 2013, when the program transitioned to UH Manoa, could you go back one slide, please? Oh, Carlo? Yeah, sorry. Thank you. So we wanted to explain and make the connections to our alumni network that when the program transitioned to UH Manoa in 2013, that's when a lot of the curriculum library was developed, and you can check them out here and also search by the participants in the institutes. Okay, thank you, Carlos. Next, please. Thank you. From 2013 through 2018, the participants in the Ethnomathematics Institute represented a diverse range of experience, disciplines, grade levels, and locations. Our alumni network now includes over 100 undergraduate STEM and pre-service educators and over 200 P20 teachers. This is an image of the P20 teachers' schools, including all of the Hawaii Department of Education's complex areas and districts, to form an integrated network and commitment to improving learner outcomes. Next, please. Additionally, with our partners, we worked with the Hawaii Teacher Standards Board to add a field of licensure in ethnomathematics that demonstrates our shared commitment to equity, empowerment, and dignity. This was officially approved in fall 2018 at the kindergarten through 6th grade, 6th through 12th grade, and kindergarten through 12th grade levels. The support from the organization that licenses all of Hawaii State Department of Education teachers highlights that our assignments, assessments, and accreditation align with state and federal guidelines. Next, please. I think I'm going to skip this slide in the interest of time, but I can come back to it later if there's time. The most important part of wanting to share this slide is the former president of the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, Robert Berry, came to one of our ethnomathematics classrooms, and he made note of the relationships between ethnomathematics and student learning. He talked about identifying development, agency, and catalyzing lasting positive change. And he also had a really sweet special shout out to Ubi. Next, please. The following is a video produced by the University of Hawaii Systems Communications that we'd like to share with you.
For more than a decade, the University of Hawaii has been developing dynamic educators through hands-on ethnomathematics training, such as sailing aboard the Polynesian Voyaging Society's double-hulled canoes Hikianalia and Hokulea, and using traditional wayfinding to teach measurement and geometry.
Right, above everything.
Ethnomathematics prepares high-quality teachers through real-world applications of teaching and learning mathematics by bridging indigenous wisdom and 21st century skills. Teachers have traveled to the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology on Mokuolo'e, also known as Coconut Island, in Kaneohe Bay to collect algae and study snapping shrimp and other creatures to measure sine curves, wavelengths, and amplitude. The Ethnomathematics program at UH Manoa's College of Education is the culmination of years of building the UH Ethnomathematics and STEM Institute, under the direction of Professor of Mathematics Education Linda Furuto, with support from state and federal funding.
Ethnomathematics inspires classrooms and communities to engage in local, global, national issues that impact our planet, such as climate change, biodiversity of our oceans and our waters, and education and human rights.
Ethnomathematics produces results in the classroom.
Ethnomathematics is just the way we should be teaching mathematics, by using culture, by going into our physical environments, and just by doing instead of just listening and, lecturing.
It's made a huge difference. I've been involved in this program since 2015, and so I've watched students go from listening to lectures to actually being involved and wanting to make a difference in their community.
In 2018, the UH Manoa College of Education began offering the first Ethnomathematics graduate certificate, making it the first academic program of ethnomathematics in the world. Later that year, the Hawaii Teacher Standards Board approved ethnomathematics as a field of licensure. With additional coursework and requirements, the graduate certificate may be extended to a master's degree in mathematics education.
I think it's fantastic that the Hawaii Teacher Standards Board has added ethnomathematics as a field because it just validates everything that we're doing. It emphasizes the importance of integrating culture in our school curricula, especially in math, which is a subject that culture isn't really seen in.
Being first in the world means the University of Hawaii is leading the way in this fast-growing field.
In your program is very important because it's opening. new ways for research in math education, for research in science, for research which is looked at from fresh standpoint.
The future vision of the Ethnomathematics program is to strive to be a model for how we learn and teach mathematics that honors all people and places, and to be a catalyst for positive change in the communities which we're endeavoring to serve in Hawaii and around the world.
Next slide, please. In conclusion, as we reflect forward on our calls to action, I absolutely understand and value and treasure the opportunity to reflect back on Ubi's legacy that lives on in each of us. The way that we navigate using the Hawaiian Star Compass is, it's not like a unidirectional compass that you look at and will point you one direction, like north 15 degrees east. The Hawaiian Star Compass, in it, you are intentionally aware of all directions around you. And when you literally and figuratively can't see the stars, we need to know where we've come from. We can backsight in order to understand where we are, in order to have vision and the strength and the hope and courage to move forward into the future. So my dear friend Ubi, we will continue to work toward an era of peace and dignity by preparing the next generation of learners and leaders through steadfast commitment to courage, compassion, and community as you have taught us. Rest in love and aloha, dear mentor and friend. Obrigado.
You made me cry again.
Thank you, Linda, for your wonderful presentation. Very emotional. And this week for us in Brazil is very emotional, right? Because all the presentations and about Ubi and his work and the legacy, friendship, mentorship, and everything. Okay, thank you very much. Now we'll go to Tony's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Tony?
Yeah. Good morning from Aotearoa, New Zealand. It's just about 2 o'clock in the morning. So it's an honor for me to give this presentation this morning. So I want to thank very much the organizers, and as is customary in our culture, the next slide, please. And just click it once more time. As is customary, our mountains greet your mountains, our rivers greet your rivers, and our ancestors greet your ancestors. So this is how we connect to each other around the world. Each of the tribes in New Zealand have a mountain, they have a river. We also, many ways, ancestor worship, in that every time we have a gathering like this, we greet our ancestors. And of course, one of them is Ubi. So next slide. So we have this saying in Māori, which is, I'll say it in Māori first and explain it in English. Ko hinga te tahi tōtara o te wao nui a tāne. So what that means, it's a saying which is saying one of the mighty trees of the forest, the tōtara tree, has fallen. And that's an analogy or a saying for Ubi. So these tōtara trees are huge and and they're likened to, and a person is likened to them and to their passing. I didn't know him personally. I've met him on a few occasions, a couple of occasions. New Zealand was, Māori in particular, were introduced to him via Bill Barton, who has since retired. And so we got to know him particularly through Bill and through his work. But I think to help understand his influence on Māori mathematics education is to also understand our context. While Linda's up the top or close to the top of the world and I'm at the bottom of the world, we actually are related in many ways, and I'll explain why. So, which is why you often will find many similarities between Hawaii and Aotearoa New Zealand in terms of the approach to ethnomathematics. Okay, next slide. So I'm going to talk about these three things. This is an overview of his influence. So first of all, his work created a space for Indigenous researchers like myself and others in the National International Academy. His work also influenced and supported initial teacher education, similar to Linda's. And his theories and ideas also supported mathematics education and Māori medium schooling. So those are the three big areas that I'll focus on in this presentation. Next slide. So we're Aotearoa New Zealand. We're at the bottom of the world. We're very isolated, colonized by the British, similar to Australia. So we have the same colonizers. And so, particularly at the moment, this isolation is working quite well for us. Because we're an island, we've been able to exclude the coronavirus pretty much really over the last year and a half. It's finally got into the country yesterday, so we're having to lock down. Okay, next slide. So we come out of the Pacific, and about 1,000 years ago, our ancestors journeyed south. We're not 100% sure whether it was from Tahiti, excuse me, or from Rarotonga, probably both, because there have been a great number of ocean journeys. So because we're an island, like Hawaii, excuse me, we're very much connected to the ocean. These voyages are pretty much a key part of our cultural traditions. Oh, excuse me. Okay, next slide. So, the Māori language is an East Polynesian language. It's related to Hawaiian, Tahiti, Marquesas. Fortunately for us, we only have one language with a number of dialects. This is a picture of my grandmother. She was a native speaker of the language. Didn't speak English very well, but by her children's generation, that's my mum's generation, they hardly could speak Māori. So almost in one generation, Māori people had lost their language. That's how quick language shift occurred. Next slide. And click it once more. So when the British settlers eventually gained economic control of the country, one of the very first things they did was to enforce English-only schooling policy. So this is a photo up the top there of my grandmother at school. And you'll note they're mostly girls. I'm not sure where the boys are. Just keep clicking, please. So the tohunga were the knowledge keepers, if you like. And in 1907, they were forbidden to practice their craft. So the navigators, largely on the pretext that to ban the healers, but of course, excuse me, the healers were also sometimes the navigators, and the particular individuals of the tribe who were the keepers of the knowledge. So one of the consequences of that law was it was the shattering, if you like, of Māori knowledge and how Māori viewed the world. Next slide. So the Māori language was excluded from schooling as the language of instruction until the early 1980s. So well over 100 years, you had to cease speaking Māori at the school gate. And if you did happen to slip into the vernacular or the native language, you were often physically punished. So my grandmother and mother were psychologically scarred by their experiences in school and experiences in speaking their mother tongue. Next slide. I just keep clicking. So by the 1940s, still 90% of Māori, who primarily lived in rural areas, still spoke the language. But after the 1940s, after the Second World War, when the government and the country needed more factory workers, there was a significant shift from rural areas to urban areas, with the consequence Māori were moving from areas of where the Māori language has many domains to areas where there's very few other than the home. Next slide. So by the late 1970s, it was predicted Māori was endangered, the Māori language is endangered, heading towards extinction. And as you can see, that happened very quickly. I would argue almost within my mother's generation. Next slide. So in response, Māori communities developed Māori medium schooling, initially without the support of the state, often in very poor conditions. The teachers were often not paid, and this was in response to the endangered state of the language. At that time, in the early 1980s, there was no resources in the Indigenous language. There's no curriculum other than the English language curriculum. The teachers were all trained in English medium schools. And so we had to invent, if you like, the language of mathematics while we taught it. And so in the early 1980s, myself and many others, and a few others rather, started to create the mathematics register to enable us to teach mathematics. So in those early years, the focus was very much on the language, restoring the language. Next slide. So where does Ubi come into the picture in terms of mathematics education? Well, if you look at the list of ideas and the list of theories, and most of them, if not all of them, resonated very much with us as a small minority indigenous group struggling to resurrect our native language and importantly our culture. And so what he did was his work, because he was a formal mathematician, therefore in countries like ours, our European counterparts, if you like, were more accepting of his research than they might have say another indigenous researcher from another part of the world. Next slide. So we were introduced to him in the late 1990s, early 2000s. We had a Ethnomathematics conference here in New Zealand. I think it was 2006. I was really at the beginning. I'd been teaching for a long time in primary and secondary schools, and I was really at the beginning of my, if you like, my academic career. And the first thing when I first joined the university was there weren't many places or many academies around the world, or nationally, internationally, where we could talk about our issues. There was opportunities through language groups, but certainly beyond that, there wasn't much space for indigenous researchers to talk to other indigenous researchers about mathematics education. So he opened up that space for us and gave us the opportunity where we could explore with other indigenous researchers or other researchers researching on indigenous mathematics issues around the world. And so since the early 2000s, through this particular program, we've been able to meet and talk with and explore ideas with our colleagues around the world. So the academy, if you like, in particularly in New Zealand, which is a very formal British model, even though Māori medium education had been going for 10 years in schools, it certainly was not part of the academy. Okay, next slide. So the next thing that his work supported was the establishment of Māori medium teacher education programs, because when you develop programs, these education programs in this country, one of the requirements is that you must have a corpus of literature that you can draw on to guide your program, and we were able to use his material, particularly in the development of our mathematics education program. And I'll talk a little bit about that shortly. So I've been lecturing now since the late 1990s in these programs, since 1995, in fact. And these teachers have now gone on, and they're now the leaders in many of our Māori medium schools around the country. Next slide. So one of the things that we have done in our program, which is similar to Linda's, is to utilize mathematics as a vehicle to revitalize the linguistic and cultural knowledge. So the first 10 or so years was very much an emphasis on saving the language, but certainly the last 15, 20 years, we've been looking at how to simultaneously value the culture and the mathematical knowledge of our ancestors, not only in academy, but also working with students in schools. Next slide. So one of the projects we've been doing both with our students at the university and in the primary schools and secondary schools are these what we call the canoe migrations. Now, every Māori who identifies as a Māori also identifies with a canoe or several canoes. And these are the canoes, if you like, that brought our ancestors down from the Pacific. Our tribes are named after them, but our for over 100 years, this knowledge was excluded from the curriculum. So Ubi's work has encouraged us and guided us to bring this knowledge back into our school curriculum. Next slide. So this is the Medusa, and this is a painting that's was on the cover of the textbooks that explained the early migrations, and basically it's a painting that shows all these starving, emaciated people, which is how we when we went to school as children, we got told your ancestors accidentally found their way here, and this is the European story of how our ancestors came to this country. But of course, it's a false one, and we've since learnt, and through collaborations with our colleagues up in Hawaii and in Rarotonga and Tahiti, that was not the case. There was, simply dozens and dozens of these voyages, and they weren't accidental. Next slide. So, one of the criticisms of the early unfreezing the cultural mathematics was that it was often seen as encouraging. It was a means to scaffold children to participate in Western mathematics. So, guided by the arguments of Ubi, we see ethnomathematics as a human right. And so over time, we've developed a 3-step cultural symmetry model for incorporating cultural practices into mathematics education. So one is to value the culture, value the language, and the mathematics practice, whether it's Western or Māori. Next slide. So again, in our local schools now, we have, I think, around 80 now around the country, with about 20 of those have been secondary. Again, his work has influenced the revitalizing of the cultural knowledge and also the social justice and transformation perspective. So initially, in the development of Māori media maths education, we're required to simply translate the English versions. But over time, we're now, because there's state curricula, the state controls very much how they're to be written, but now the state is much more accommodating of a Māori-centric curriculum. And right at this moment, we're developing our assessment tasks, because like many countries around the world, our students require particular credentials to get into university, and numeracy and maths is compulsory for many university courses. However, we now have all our exams are in the Māori language. We have been able to include both a socio-cultural element and linguistic element to them. So that gets tested as well as the mathematics knowledge. So, for example, the whales, because we're an island, we in the South Pacific, we're on the whale route to the Antarctic, they congregate in the Kumedix, which is between us and halfway between us and Rarotonga. And our ancestors used to follow them down. So they'd get to the Kumedix and they would follow the whales as they came down the New Zealand coast. So we have added that to the exam, and the students have to be able to, I mean, these are exams for year 9s. The students have to be able to give the directions. They have to be able to give, talk about some of the signs, the land signs and the sky signs that our ancestors, and not only, but also relevant to today. Okay, next slide. So we've been working with students in schools to look at our stories, and many of our stories are spatial orientation stories, they're navigation stories. So this man here comes from the Pacific. He comes probably from Rarotonga or Tahiti, and every day they would go out fishing, and this big octopus would eat their bait. So one day they conspired to kill this octopus. So they chased it, and give you one guess where they chased it to, and of course they chased it to New Zealand. And in the process of chasing this whale, they laid down all the star directions and the different ways of reading the signs to arrive at New Zealand. So it's a navigation story, and we have many, many of these stories, both sea ones and land ones, that help orientate, and they're still relevant today. Next slide, thanks. So, like our relatives in Hawaii and the rest of the Pacific, and because we are surrounded by the ocean, it's not very far to the ocean from any part of New Zealand. I was born right next to the sea. My house currently overlooks the sea. So we're hugely influenced by the ocean, by our culture. But for years, over 100 years, that was excluded from schooling. It wasn't part of the school curriculum. Next slide. So not only has he influenced our work in the academy, but we're also in this country required as academics to publish. So we've been able to draw on his work for a large number of our publications. So I think at this point I'll stop here and just want to acknowledge, that what an incredible man he was, and lives on. I believe in many of you who, his memory. Yeah, you have much closer relationship than I do. But while we may not have known him as well, his work has certainly been influential in the development of multimedia mathematics education, and by extension, multimedia education in this country. So at that point, I'll stop.
Oh, thank you so much, Tony and Linda and Kay, for staying up so late for all of us here. And it just means so very much to all of us to see the effect of what Ubi did in your context. And it just means so very, very much to all of us. You want to say something?
Yes, I do. Now I think Carlos, he's checking the chats because we have 2 channels that are doing this transmission. So Carlos, you may tell them what people are saying in both channels.
Thursday, it's Charles Day.
Yeah, Charles Day. Yes, right.
Hello, thanks, Linda, Tony, and Kay.
Wonderful.
We have some comments only, not pretty much, or many questions, but several comments. Maria Cecilia says that Ubi open spaces for us all. Giciara is also complimenting us. Emmanuel, Nintia Sante selling Ethnomathematics is great. Lucia Maria is waiting for the subtitles. We are going to include the subtitles afterwards. Well, soon enough, I hope. But Lúcia, a gente vai incluir a legenda em breve, tá? Então, Lúcia, a gente pede desculpas, na verdade, a todos, mas é um evento ao vivo, então fica difícil de fazer isso ao vivo online, assim. Enfim, we have several. Well, José Roberto is telling how impressive is the work of Linda. Congratulating. Regina is also congratulating Linda and Kay and Tony. Very emotional, everyone. Maria Cecilia commented that how great is to have a graduate certificate in ethnomathematics is really something unique. So do you think that this is some sort of tendency worldwide, so we can have a graduation or graduate courses and specifically towards ethnomathematics? What do you think, all of you?
I mean, we would like to. I have seen Linda's program. I've gone online and looked at it. Most of our programs undergraduate, but certainly we think there is a opportunity there for us in New Zealand to develop. May not be a full course, full program, but certainly some courses.
In Australia, we struggle even to have a master's in mathematics education per se, let alone in ethnomathematics. There was, to my knowledge, only one course ever at Deakin University that looked at mathematics in a cultural context and used a book by Pam Harris for that, which has been very influential in terms of ethnomathematics, looking at our First Nations mathematics and making a difference, I think. But I can't see it happening. Papua New Guinea has just that one subject as an elective in all their teacher education courses, but particularly for secondary, where they have to do a research project into mathematics of a cultural group. And then they also have to link that to the syllabus. So they link activities to different aspects of their secondary school syllabus, their high school syllabus.
Okay, Carlos, I'm not sure if Linda's going to answer this question, if this kind of program is tendency. So Linda can answer the question, and after you, I have a question for all of you as well.
Mahalo, Milton. I think one of my thoughts is I wholeheartedly agree that Ubi opened up this space for so many of us to participate in ethnomathematics in whatever way makes sense for the populations that the communities we live in, we work with, we learn from, we learn with. And I mean, absolutely, the students in the program have read the work of Milton, Daniel, Tony, Kay, so many of others out there. And I really think the emphasis being, I also really love Tony's presentation. And the thought that I have is how the ocean, it really does truly connect us wherever we may be. And I think that We certainly know that the ocean is an integral part of our life in the Pacific. It's around us, but I see that it extends far beyond maybe what we can and can't see. And I think that the connections, like this space here, being able to talk about ethnomathematics in the way that we are talking about it right now, just who knows where it can go. But wherever we may be, it provides multiple opportunities and avenues for us to participate in ethnomathematics in whatever capacity that we are able to. So I just really want to mahalo everyone again for this opportunity and this gift in this space.
Okay, thank you, Linda. My question for you, all of you, is this. I was glad to see in Linda's presentation about the ethnomathematics and the STEM education, right? Because I do not know, I may be wrong, but I have the feeling that the STEM education misses this cultural part of it. And we wrote 2 or 3 articles about it, saying that the necessity of STEM education has this kind of piece, the cultural piece, in our descent is missing. So what do you think about that, all of you?
Yes, in Australia, they have looked at particularly the fish traps, which are, tens of thousands of years old, in the rivers or the seas, near the seas. And in a sense, they've looked at it in science, and it can be connected to your mathematics from the science. And when I went, there has been a recent book written about technologies and agriculture of the First Nations people in Australia by a fellow called Bruce Pascoe, which was probably the first book that really looked at the technologies. And there's been a lot of criticism of that book, but I don't quite know what. But what it does show is the degree of agriculture that was existing, which they had never really talked about in Australia before. It's more a managed culture, but it's certainly there. And I've just written these 2 chapters in this last book and tried to draw together the technology of Papua New Guineans and linked it to mathematics education. So I think a good way to go in that sense is STEM. But the idea of using technology and patterns and coding even, I think there's a great deal that we could look at with coding in a sense. I think, Tony, you were talking about the stories and traveling, and it reminded me of the use of string figures in Papua New Guinea to often tell a story that can be a traveling story, as well as many other stories that they would have. So it's interesting that you mentioned that, because that's one of the things that's been written up by one of the students in Papua New Guinea. And if you know, Eric van den Dresch has looked at the sub-procedures that exist in the string figures. And in that sense, it's quite closely linked, I think.
I'm sorry, I agree with you. And technology, I mean, in my opinion, is connected to the concept of technocracy in the trivium curriculum that Ubiratan D'Ambrosio proposes. So I hope to Linda and Tony, if you want to comment on this. And Carlos also has 2 questions to place on the chat to place for you. Before Linda and Tony, would you like to comment on this? About STEM education and ethnomathematics?
Linda? Okay.
think I concur with what Kay has stated, and I don't think at this time I have anything more to add.
Okay.
Um,
Okay, Tony?
I'm also a science educator, and so the ethnomaths idea developed by Ubi, we have developed an ethnoscience program, and there is a lot of debate in this country about the indigenous knowledge versus Western science. But the way we look at it is that both our indigenous and contemporary knowledge can support us in making sense of the world. We don't have any difficulty as Māori reconciling the spiritual with, if you like, the scientific. So in terms of how the relevance for STEM, I think it's very relevant.
Okay, so Carlos, what are the two questions from the chat?
Yes, I have two questions here. The first one is from Nikki Linehan. Nikki is asking, do you have any advice for teaching a mathematics course for indigenous students who are in the Bachelor of Education in Indigenous Language Revitalization Program?
I have lots of advice and probably don't have the time to provide it. But I mean, if Nikki wanted to contact me and talk a little bit more about it, I lecture, I teach, and I used to run the program similar to Linda's. And I've developed the mathematics courses in the program. And one of the components on the program is an ethnomaths component, because our students are, not all of them are from Maori language schools. They come often from English medium and develop their language as adults. So frequently they're second language students. So one of the things we have to do is, alongside all the other courses, we must have the language acquisition, language development type program. And because our students aren't native speakers of the Maori language, we have our programs designed to scaffold them into first maybe mainly with English, but eventually by the third year it's all in the Maori language. So if Nikki wants to talk a little bit more about it, I'm most happy to.
Okay, thank you. There is
Australia,
yes.
They are, as you know, most people actually lost their languages, their indigenous languages, and they are revitalizing those in schools. And so the emphasis is as much on culture as it is on language. So every student in New South Wales will be expected, whether they're Indigenous or non-Indigenous, to learn the language where their school is. That includes Sydney, and that will include some culture. And so it's very much driven by Indigenous elders, and they all have a role to play in the school. And that's really special because of the degree of loss of language and culture, some of which can't be re-established because it's well and truly lost. But I think it's important that the culture comes with the language, but the mathematics is a little bit there, but not very much. I mean, counting, yes, but counting's not a strength of most Indigenous Australian languages either. So bringing in the mathematics is there, but mostly in terms of position, and they do quite a bit of language work in position. Yeah.
We have a similar.
I'm sorry, Linda. Okay, you can comment.
We have a similar history and story as my Australian sister and Aotearoa brother, Maori brother, have been sharing in Hawaii as well. You know, this loss of culture and language revitalization, and really the 1970s in Hawaii were a very pivotal point in time where we didn't have the knowledge of wayfinding or celestial navigation, and we had to go outside of Hawaii to find that knowledge from Papamau Piailug in Sarawal. The reason why I mentioned that is because language revitalization is so closely connected intimately, as Kay has mentioned, to culture and history. And we need to know all of these. With the resurgence of Hokulea and Polynesian voyaging hundreds of years that have been lost in the Hawaiian Islands and other parts of the Pacific, with that came a resurgence in our aha punana leo, our schools. And now in Hawaii, you can have your education from early childhood education through your dissertation, which you can write in Olelo Hawaii in the Hawaiian language at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And I think that what's really important, a thought that I have, Nikki, is as we think through whatever it may be, teaching a math methods course in your specific question, thinking through what knowledge do we have in the spaces that we're part of through academia, as well as going far beyond that to the community across the oceans or bodies of water that surround us. I think the thoughts of acculturation and acculturation are just on my mind right now, about how when we don't have the knowledge for whatever reason that it was taken from us, that we have the courage and audacity and are empowered to then look beyond, and the humility to receive whatever might be gifted to us.
Okay, thank you, Linda. We have some comments from Emmanuel. He's about the first point that Milton brought us. Is Emmanuel comments that one way to connect ethnomathematics to STEM is through maker education. Cultures have been making baskets, canoes, mats, and etc. There are so many STEM concepts frozen in these. We can localize such forms of cultural making by introducing technology into them. For example, lamp holders made of baskets, introducing computations and light-up fashion into Brazilian lace making. And he says that more info can be found in his paper, which is a localized approach to the maker movement, and then TS&T Emmanuel. So this is, and finally, the last question we have here, and is from Margaret Miura. Would you, Kay, Linda, and Tony, summarize your ethnomathematics vision in 2 to 3 sentences?
Sure. The vision of the ethnomathematics program is every child will know who they are, where they come from, and where they're going. I think simply that's it. Who are we? What's our identity? What lineage, great lineage are we part of? You know, when the sky is dark, when we feel like we may be lost in this world, we know we come from strong genealogical lineages, and that mathematics is in us. It doesn't necessarily need to be taught to us. It's in us, and our strengths and our assets or what's going to help us figure out how to navigate into the future.
Mine is similar in that I see ethnomathematics as providing an opportunity or a way of enculturating our students into being Māori, which is the primary goal of Māori medium education, which is both language and cultural revitalization through mathematics.
And I think where culture is a good way of appreciating mathematics and actually seeing yourself as a mathematical thinker, because culture is often a strong identity for our students. And so by taking the strong identity of culture and recognizing the mathematics of culture can often lead students to develop a sense that they can do mathematics too.
Thank you. Thank you, Kay, Tony, Linda, Milton, and Daniel. Well, I think that we have come to the end of our event. I will thank Linda, Tony, Kay, Milton, and Daniel for being here with us. I will make a quick reminder that today at 2 p.m. we will be here again to receive Lawrence Shirley, Todd Shockey, and Patrick Scott will talk about the role of Ubiratan D'Ambrosio in the evolution of ethnomathematics in the international context. So this is going to be our second event of today. And the last one starts at 4 p.m. and is with Armando Aroca, Maria Gavarrete, and Domingo Yorcom. La importancia y el papel de Ubiratan D'Ambrosio para el desarrollo de las etnomatemáticas en América Latina. And this is it. Well, I thank you, and I will leave Daniel and Milton to give, and all of you, naturally, your final words to our audience.
Yeah, okay. Then I was going to say something, so do I. I would like to thank you, Linda, Tony, and Kay, to be here with us, paying this tribute to Ubiratan D'Ambrosio. And I know that it's early in the morning for you now, and even for Kay also. It must be 1 in the morning now, or 2 in the morning. But for Kay. And after Daniel, you also can say your final words to the audience that who is watching us on the other side of this screen.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. And I know that Carlos and Milton and I are looking forward to collaborating with you all in the middle of the night as well to pay you back. So thank you so much. It really means a lot to us here. And thank you so much.
Now your final words, Linda, Tony, and Kay.
Mahalo nui, Milton, and sorry, go ahead, Kate. You want to go? Mahalo nui, Milton, and Daniel for the opportunity to participate. What a joy and honor it has been to be part of this panel with Kay and Tony. And Carlos, thank you for your role in bringing us all together. And especially a big mahalo to everyone who's online right now, joining us from around the world. We wouldn't be here without you. And for this reason, you're in our thoughts and our hearts. And we wishing you all the very best on your journeys.
Okay.
Yes, thank you for organizing this. I've enjoyed sharing and listening to Linda and Tony. and seeing little flashes from Maria de Fantino, hello to her, and a few other people. And I just want to acknowledge again the elders in Papua New Guinea and Australia who have shared their knowledge with people like myself. It's a special a privilege for the sharing, and I think that's part of what Ethnomathematics has done around the world, is to acknowledge so much of the mathematics of so many different people, and it's brought us all together. I often say the ethnomathematicians are a great bunch of people, and wonderful people.
Okay, Tony?
Thank you very much, everybody. It's through the work of Ambrosio that we're now all connected in some way, and we all have common interests. And as I said in my opening, it's given us a space and provided us with opportunities to improve for us here in New Zealand, is to improve educational opportunities for our students, for our families, and our communities.
Okay, so this is it. I give you all my best regards and wishes, and we are coming to the end of our event. So, obrigado a todos os presentes no chat. Chegamos ao final do nosso evento. 2 horas da tarde estaremos de volta aqui novamente. E depois, às 4 horas, novamente. Hoje o dia está realmente cheio de novamente. Queridos, um grande abraço para vocês e até logo. Goodbye, everyone. Thanks for being here with us. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.